But this is really an opportunity, I think, for you to ask questions to all the different speakers that you've heard from here today. We've got a pretty wide breadth of knowledge here, from everywhere from Bill and his vast experience in SEO, and I'm sure various other web masteries, John and his eclectic career, and then you have a Googler as well. And actually, Chris, I couldn't find your picture online, and I wasn't sure which one was the proper one to use, so I'm very ashamed to say that I've just summarized you in this picture here as just the Google logo.
That's all right.
Feel free to ask him questions as if he was just the Google logo.
And I will not answer any of them. I'll answer what I can.
So I'm gonna kick off with a starter question, and then we're going to have mic runners running around to all of you so that you can ask questions as well. But I think just to kick things off, having heard some of the other speakers here today and had a chance to speak to some of our publishers, what's one thing that stood out to you today just from the agenda that we've heard so far? Bill, I'll start with you.
I like Chris's statement about schema being foundational. I really think it is. I just see more and more importance every day. I'm studying a lot. I'm speaking about it in 2 weeks in Italy. There are ways that Google is working to automate updating knowledge graphs, and I think the more you inform Google what is going on with the topics that you cover, the more you're going to show up in search results that show off your site and show you as an expert.
Excellent. Mr. John.
Mine was about the schema as well, and marking things up. It was interesting to me because I was just sitting there thinking, how can we automate this for publishers, because this sounds really hard. And then I was talking to Martin, and he said, "Oh, this is tough. This is a tough thing to do." So it depends how much content you've got. But overall, I'm thinking more of Google as moving towards this answer engine thing, and there are some threats there for publishers, because obviously, how do you monetize audio responses? But I think there's also some opportunities for those who are on the front edge. So the people, for example, who are here, are interested in being on that front edge. There's an awful lot of sites out there that sort of get forgotten about and don't get worked on. So I think there's some good news in that too.
Chris, I'm afraid to ask almost. Is it going to be schema as well?
No, but I'll just have to go back on the Speakable though. Speakable, yes, Speakable's not going to drive traffic in the traditional sense to your site. Because they're not actually clicking through on a desktop or a mobile. But it will, over time, drive brand loyalty engagement with your publication. So if I am getting, I don't know, if you have car product pages with historical information about cars, individual models and makes, and if you make that speakable and people can actually ask questions about the car and get information back, it is said it will say who this information is coming from. So then over time, if I'm asking the same questions about cars and I'm always getting information from one particular publication, when I'm on my phone, I'll go to that publication then. So it's about building that loyalty and engagement. And unfortunately, not unfortunately, but voice search is becoming the way forward. More and more people are happy to, I set reminders by talking to Google on my phone. Just because I'm lazy and I don't want to type it in. But that's the honest. So it is an interesting step forward. It's not going to hurt your business. It's actually probably going to help it, but you need to diversify. To your actual question, what I found most interesting was the Dr. Greg.
Yeah.
Yes. ML, AI, more ML. Let's call it ML properly. That's interesting for me, especially around optimizations, going beyond A/B testing. Personalization based on ML is the future. Like, be it a year from now, and 6 months from now, or 5 years from now. Being able to personalize your content based on the user's segments, audience that you build. I want to show all my best highly engaged users one ad, but actually casual guys who just fly in and out, show them 3, increase viewability, things like that from a monetization perspective. So yeah, that would be my side.
Excellent. So let's start filtering in some questions from all of you. So if you could put your hand up, and we have a mic runner here that will try to filter the mics to you. Come on, guys. We got a lot of time to fill here. There we go.
It's going to be a quick session.
Is structured data? Okay, we hear a lot about structured data, but I think John made a fleeting comment as well about knowledge graph using structured data. Is it not possible that by all using structured data with great enthusiasm, we're helping Google build a great knowledge graph and search engine, but it's at the cost of our own work on our own websites?
I think that a lot of search results are going to start coming from answering questions about properties and attributes of entities as opposed to matching documents and pages, keywords on documents and pages. People are going to want to know things more than how tall was Abraham Lincoln. And you can build business models on things that are more complex than that.
And I'll add something to that as well, and it's something that Matt Ludwig, who's actually on Google's mobile team, shared with me at our last event, because this was a subject that came up when we talked about voice search. And that is that generally when you think about knowledge graph and voice search, you're thinking about quick answers to questions. So how tall was Abraham Lincoln, for example? That's a commodity. I mean, I said in the very beginning, think of your content like a product, right? And so if you are a manufacturer or a product provider of some kind, I can't think of a great example right off the top of my head that's not ridiculous, but you don't want to have a commodity product because then it's all price point based, right? Anybody can provide you with anyone can provide you with gasoline, for example, right? But if you are a gas station and you provide a convenience store along with it and a car wash and some of these other things, then you start to diversify your business and you offer something more to your customers. So I think generally as a digital publisher, while John talked earlier about evergreen content sites and the ability for them to have a good, healthy stream of organic search revenue, you do want to think about your content likely in a form of, I'm not just providing people with simple answers that they could get anywhere, that your content is more engaging than that to your audience. Your product that you're offering to your customers, your audience, is essentially something that they could only get from you or is a unique perspective from you. And if it is a perspective on Abraham Lincoln that's more complex than how tall he was or something like that, that's certainly not something that Google is going to pull into Knowledge Graph in a full page. It's not something you're going to listen to an audiobook on when you voice search something. So I do think that the answers that you're going to get from voice or knowledge graph are a little bit limited to some of those commodity answers and not so much to more complex perspectives, which I think everybody in this room is likely providing to their audience in some form or fashion. John, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I think that you can hedge against that. It's a risk. You're feeding the beast that might eat you. It's not a very nice analogy, especially as we're being hosted by Google. Don't eat me. I think that, as I said, you can invest in long form content that can't be summarized in a voice answer, but there isn't any way around it. Everyone has Google Risk, right? There just isn't any way around it. I think everybody thought, oh great, let's go to Facebook and we're gonna give them what they want, and then they're gonna give us traffic. And look how that went. Not very well.
Chris, anything to add?
So, first thing, schema and structured data isn't just for Google. It's based on schema.org, which is a open source data markup. So it works for Bing, Yahoo, DuckDuckGo, Yandex. Everyone uses it as a way of understanding what you're on your site. I specifically talk about it in terms of news because if you are writing an article about Christina Aguilera, then as long as the markup about Christina Aguilera is in there, when people search for news or when people are looking for the latest story about Christina Aguilera, we know that your content is about Christina Aguilera. It's specifically important to ensure that when I'm talking the generalistic we as a publisher ecosystem, we need to, as I talk about it being foundational, you need to basically ensure that when someone searches, be it through Google or another search engine, that the answer that they get is what they were looking for. And again, it comes down to, if you think about your habits for searching, there's times that you want in-depth searching. So you're going to go through a topic and you're going to go deep, and you're going to go to multiple search pages or results, and you're going to go, think about it like Wikipedia. You're going to go in for one article, but then you're going to read the whole article, and you maybe go to a second page and a third page by through the blue links. And there's other times where you literally want to know how tall John Washington or George Washington was. I think he said Lincoln.
Lincoln.
Yeah, how tall Lincoln was, and you literally just want that answer like that quick. Your name and your publication and everything will always be in every search engine, and will, even if the speakable result is if it's speakable and it's voice, your publication's name will still be there. So there's no, yeah, I think that's probably the best way I can answer.
Other questions?
Not that good.
Thanks. Just as a direct follow-up, in terms of schema.org, let's say you have an article that is about Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, right? And Hollywood in general, maybe, let's say. Yeah?
Are they still together? Do you know?
I
They
don't
split
know.
up.
Not that I care.
Google it later.
Random example. Would you basically make sure that every major subject of that article is marked up in schema.org, or would you just mark this up as news article? Here's the headline. Or would you say news article and then person, Brad Pitt, person, Angelina Jolie?
There are certain things that you want to do, like if the article is about a specific entity, there's a main entity of page where you identify who the main character, main person the story is about. That's not a bad idea. Google came out with a related entities, with an entities metrics patent where they talked about other ways of measuring how important certain things are. One of them was they talked about related entities. So if you search for Tom Hanks, you'll get a knowledge panel which shows other actors and actresses who appeared in movies that he appeared in. And it's not a bad thing to include in a page in an article about Tom Hanks either, because people might want to know answers to those types of questions. There are other things like notability is a thing that is a requirement to be published in Wikipedia, and it also is a metric they said is important and they may use to include information in the knowledge panel. So there's some variety. When you write about one entity, talk about Mason and Dixon, the guys who mapped a lot of the United States. You don't talk about one without talking about the other. If you have situations like that where you have people who are that closely related, mention both of them.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Yeah, it's not regarding schema.
Oh, no.
All right. Yes, a break from schema.
It's not regarding schema.
Schema-telligence is what we're going to have to change the name of this thing to.
John, it was regarding buying a website. What were you? Would you buy one that doesn't require maintenance, or would you factor that in? How much content needs to be added to it?
Yeah, we didn't add any content to any of our sites. So
So
I
what,
know
let them fizzle out, sort of thing.
I feel like a charlatan sitting up here. You must always update your content. But the fact was we were doing experiments, we were doing scientific experiment, and we didn't want to introduce any other variables into what became our system. If you're buying a site and you want to have as much sort of hands-off as you can, user-generated content is good, providing you moderate it. So one of the reasons that the Internet Slang site did so well is that it had a mechanism to get people to submit suggestions for Internet Slang, kept the content coming in. We paid somebody, I think it's Shauna, Tim's wife, who does that. She checks out all of the, to see if they're real suggestions, and puts them out once a week, and then that's it. Yeah, so it is possible. I mean, I don't know much about adding content, if I'm honest.
I will add, John, to an interesting side note. I don't know if you want me to mention this or not, but sometimes when you would buy sites, the owner, who was also the primary content provider, they would often ask you if they could continue to add content to the site because it was a fun hobby for them.
They did, and that was amazing.
So you might get lucky, and you might have somebody that wants to produce content for you for free. Other questions? Behind you, if you can hand the mic back to him. Thank you.
Hey, first of all, thank you all for the talks. They were great. My question is mainly for Bill. With respect to analyzing Google patterns and trying to kind of glean information from that,
right.
I imagine Google pattern about 100 things a day. What kind of percentage are actually useful, and also what sort of latency do you tend to see on these things? Because I imagine they might pattern something and then not actually start weighting it as a metric for months or whatever.
Google's diversified what they're patenting a lot. They are focusing upon things they wouldn't have 10 years ago. There was maybe 1 or 2 medical patents 10 years ago. There are many hundreds from Verily, and they've been doing lots of things with Android, with smartphones. The Internet of Things is coming up. It'd be smart to do more stuff with that. They are doing more stuff with that. I usually look for search-related patents because I do stuff dealing with search, and it's often where I get questions from people about. But they broaden so much. I follow inventors like people follow authors. Someone reads everything Stephen King writes. I read everything Tristan Upstill writes, because I like the patents that he writes. He writes about search quality, and they're often relevant to what I look at. Not everything that Google patents is used as a process by Google, but patents are about the algorithms that they use to solve specific problems. They're not always written out in a step-by-step map of how the process works, but they provide so much information about assumptions that search engineers make about searchers, about the web, about how search works, how it should work, and how certain problems can be solved. So some things we see do get used. Sergey Brin wrote Google's second patent. It wasn't called PageRank like the one that Lawrence Page wrote a couple months before, but it has a lot to do with semantic web type stuff that we're seeing with schema. So they get around to some of this stuff.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Run it over here. Chris, I don't suppose you want to comment on Google patents?
Not even opening my mouth.
Hi. So I have a question to the Chris. So as you said, like for the schema is mostly it's so useful for the news and all everything, right? But what about the evergreen content? If my content is already doing great, and if I wanted to put a new schema and everything, will it really help me in the long run? For example, if my content is like best offers in October, such kind of things, and if I already implemented a schema over there in the particular content and I'm updating again and again in every October, so will that really help me in the ranking factors and all?
So I'm not here. Yeah.
Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, everyone's now looking at me right now. So it's not.
You get a spotlight.
Forget about ranking factor. I think that's the most important, and I can't say. I'm a publisher myself. I have a website on the side in Ireland. Forget about ranking factors. Don't think about it like that. Think about it as you have a piece of content, be it or a piece of a product, or no matter what your business is, you're solving a problem. In your case, giving people offices in Joburg, I think is what you said. Okay, so I'm looking for property in Joburg. So think about it as, okay, I'm trying to solve that problem. So what the structured data or the schema that you're trying to answer for is buildings, location, Joburg. So that, in terms of updating it, schema.org constantly has new, as again, it's open source, so there are new ones added sometimes. So you don't need to be updating it all the time, but like as new things come around that are particularly important for your business or your area, then yeah, but I do a swath change across the whole site, not just on individual pages. Again, don't think about it about ranking. It's all about answering the user question or the user problem, and that should be from your editorial point of view, from business. Think about it from monetization. Think about it from everything. You're trying to solve problems individually and as a business, so that's what you should kind of focus on.
Perfect.
Related question. Specifically, would adding schema to a how-to kind of a blog help, or is it sufficient for just a news site?
Schemas for everything.
For everything.
It's
So I could add it
e-commerce,
to a
it's-
blog also, which has a how-to kind of a content or a evergreen tutorials.
Yep. There is a how-to schema, yeah.
Make sure it's relevant, though. I know an orthopedic surgeon who hired a designer to build him a site who used a theme that focused upon creative works. Knee surgery isn't a creative work.
No. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
In Search Console, if I'm not incorrect, Bill, Search Console will warn you if you've marked up your site with what they call spammy markup, correct?
Yeah.
They don't always recognize things like that you've chosen creative works for your surgery site.
So, but if you have something that's relevant, just to answer any other schema questions that may pop up, which that's fair, you can ask them. But I think it's fair to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you have content on your site that has the ability to have schema markup added to it, you should probably add it if you're interested in more traffic from Google.
All web search engines.
All web search engines.
There are ways that it doesn't necessarily directly influence rankings, but it may get you to show up for a wider range of things that are precise, that are relevant to your site.
Sounds like a yes.
Yes.
Just do it.
So non-schema now. I'll answer more schema questions after. It's just obviously, hopefully there's more.
Questions? Back here we got some more.
Hey, I have a question for Chris. How would you build an audience of your brand lovers? Like, what would be a way to target them in advertising? Is there a way?
In advertising or for analytics?
In advertising, if you say these are my most important customers, I identify as brand lovers, how would you advertise to them?
Yeah. So first thing, I've done that for you guys. If you go to the playbook, in the playbook, you can, if you use Google Analytics, I've built the segments for you. You can just import them directly into your Google Analytics. So that's there for you. Then tweaking them is the tweaking them specifically for your industry, your website. So they're built for news, but we've done sports sections version, sport lovers. So where you then section off particular areas of your site. So obviously sports in this case. And that kind of then know if I find a sports lover, then they're on reading sports articles once every 2 days across 30 days. So then you can literally say these are the most highly engaged. Then go beyond that and you can start thinking about, okay, well actually if I know the average is X amount of page views, check the size audience and go, if I go one page over that average, how still big is my audience?
I meant more like, is there a way to pull those people out and advertise to those people?
Oh, sorry.
Retarget them.
Yes.
If you have GA360 and Google Ad Manager integration, you can do it that way.
Okay. And what do you think is the most important metric for being like a brand lover? Like, is it being loyal or time on page?
Sessions per
clicking on
user.
ads?
Sessions per user.
Sessions per user?
Yeah.
How often they come back.
Yeah, how literally the number of sessions they're coming. Keep it a 30-day date range. As I said, beyond that, you're in e-commerce territory. And you guys, unless you are e-commerce, I should say. So if you're publications or magazines, keep it 30 days with sessions per user.
John, you may have some insights on both of those questions, I would think.
Not really. I don't know. I think you need to. Personalization, which is basically what we're specializing in now. More and more getting down into that rabbit hole of the specific signals that users give off, and making a prediction about users like that, and changing things for them. Those are the I think that's the future of the internet. If you look at all of the big web properties online that have done very, very well over the last 10 years, LinkedIn, Facebook, they are personalizing. There are 10,000 versions of Facebook alive at any one time. I get the 1999, they weren't even around, 2008 version because I hardly ever go there. So they've decided, they've probably bucketed me into that version. So that's the way that I am now. So I think, what you're wanting to do is obviously continue the conversation and get them back. Those of you who've been to Ezoic.com will know we retarget everyone. So you see the space lady all over the internet. That's a good technique.
So I'll add one thing to that, just because it is something that I think is fairly relevant. So visitor segmentation, I think Chris and John would both agree, is very important. And I think one of the things, and this is something John and I have talked about at previous Pubtelligence events, and that is that, if you go back to my magic trick at the very beginning, and it's not just because I want to talk about magic again, it's that you remember I mentioned at the very beginning that there's an asymmetry of data between the person that drew the card and then me. So I have all this information that she doesn't have. That's how the advertising space or the digital ecosystem largely works. So advertisers have all this information about your audience. They know exactly what impressions they want to buy. They know that it's Tyler Bishop and he's a 31-year-old male from San Diego, California on his mobile device, and it's 3 o'clock on Wednesday. They know that, and they bid on that impression because they know it's me. As a digital publisher, oftentimes we are serving ads to a broad audience without that kind of information. So segmenting your users, knowing the ones that are the most loyal, those ones are your most valuable users. Those are the ones that you should be able to monetize for a premium. So unless you're able to segment those and then go do direct deals with advertisers in some form or fashion, then you need to be understanding how you're going to segment your audiences and then serve them different ad values based on the value of those users to the site. Questions? The mic up here.
I think this is a question for Chris, but everyone jump in. It's kind of a theoretical thing, in the age of search and publishing. So if we're kind of moving into the age of voice. I do a lot of work with sort of like visually impaired people, and Age UK, obviously we've got an ever-evolving population, getting older, and so they'll probably want to search in their 90s a little bit differently. So talking to something is going to be the way forward instead of typing or something like that. So we're probably going to evolve. In terms of delivering that audio experience from a publisher's point of view, we're kind of moving into kind of radio or audio or podcasting in a way. Is that theoretically, is that kind of something we should be considering, or is Google or the other search engines going to, with AI, create a voice for our content or something? What's kind of the landscape looking like?
So two things. One, if that is your area for kind of accessibility. Remember I was talking about Lighthouse? It's the tool. One of the audits is accessibility, and it will actually rank you based on the accessibility of the page and the content. Always make sure that's 100%. You want to literally be that person, be blind or deaf or whatever they need, make sure that your content is available for them. Personally, for accessibility, where do I see the future? Again, by the way, I'm talking for Chris Jones right now, not Google. My opinion is we're going to end up with a diverse landscape. You're going to end up, so I can tell you, I've already listened to one podcast today, probably listen to two more for the end of the day. Where do I get my news? I get my news through select sources that I've over time begun to build an affinity towards. But I also I have access to Twitter, so basically other people's news and their stories and what they consider most important is shared with me in some form, and that usually then builds over time, and I end up picking up another product and things like that. Audio is important, because if we're just taking the visually impaired, just focusing in on that, a majority of outside of I think there was a Braille screen at one point that I think is still around. So I don't know much, but as long as you have if you are not set up for that, you are literally missing a swath of people who. I'm going to show my nerd streak. There is a charity in the US called Able Gamers. Have you heard of them? Okay, so they essentially work with Microsoft, Xbox, Sony publishers, and different game developers to ensure that people with disabilities can still play video games. So some of you may have seen the Microsoft Xbox. They actually created a special controller for people with disabilities and they had to build a charity, these Able Gamers, because a lot of people don't think about, well, what if I'm colorblind? What if I can't actually kind of hit the controller at the exact second you want me to? So they work with developers to understand, hey, there's this whole audience out here who love video games, love your content, but they can't interact with it. So my advice for all of you, be it no matter what part of the industry, digital industry you work in, is ensure that, have a think, could a blind person read this? Could a deaf person? Think about your accessibility. Make sure you're not missing any potential audiences. And if you are, what can you do to fix that? And that's all what I want to personally do, is ensure that everyone's content is available for everyone who wants it. And I think that's probably the best way to think about internet and Google and Bing and Yahoo. It's basically just getting information from point A to point B for when someone wants it.
Thank you.
Questions?
Got one here.
Yeah.
Just down here. Be very patient.
Question for John. What advice would you give for finding buyers for a website?
Extra advice as to how to find people to buy from.
Yeah, if you're looking to sell.
If you're looking to sell,
Speak to this guy.
yeah. Meet me afterwards. No, I don't buy anymore. I've given up.
You're off that drug, cold turkey.
Seriously, if you want to list, if you've got a good web property, I would think about listing it on Flipper.com. I think it is a good place to go. Just beware if you're a buyer. There are website brokers out there, like Latonus, I think are pretty good, and there's a couple of others, right?
Yeah, there's a couple that actually come to multiple of our events. If you're interested in connecting with somebody, I'd have
there's a few people around, and I don't know if you stand on the stage here. I think there's a couple of people might be interested in it. But yes, it's really about trying to get. It's like selling anything, you supply and demand, right? You want to get lots of people interested at the same time and to bid.
Question over here. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Looking at both the side of search and advertising, my site at the moment is 90% organic, and all of our ad revenue is from AdSense. So basically, Google owns my site because they decide who comes to visit and how much I'm going to get paid for it. Do you see that sort of trend continuing indefinitely, or do you think it's going to diversify? There are going to be other players coming into that?
I think Foursquare is coming back.
It really is. I'm seeing it more. Do you remember Swarm on Twitter and the Foursquare? I'm going to jump in. You should diversify traffic. I had 5 years ago, I was on this stage, someone asked me about Facebook, and they were saying 90% of their traffic was coming from Facebook, and I was like, no, your job to start thinking about that. I talked about email. So if you have content newsletters, start diversifying through email. Look at your direct web push notifications, referral, so content syndication and things like that. So it's very much, and I can't answer for the players' activity, but I really suggest think about how you can tap into other traffic sources.
Yeah, you're talking about Google risk again, concentration of risk. It's there for everyone. We do all work for Google indirectly. Seriously though, I think you've got a new player in the market now, which is Amazon. Amazon have grown their programmatic business extremely quickly, and also Facebook have been sort of coming very, very slowly into the web arena, but really have just largely stayed into monetization of apps. So sort of an ad mob alternative Facebook audience network. And don't forget that there are a lot of head bidders out there now. And there's, of course, exchange bidding, which is a Google product. But I do think, actually, with ads.txt, something that you should look at, what Chris said is exactly right. I would look at your email as being one. Another one to think about is PWA. So if you make your site, if you direct people and you give them a PWA version of your site, you can get them to save it on their device, and then you can do notifications. Notifications are really exciting for publishers. I love the idea of it, getting people to come back to your site from a notification on their phone, which of course was always the promise of native apps, but never really, outside of gaming, nobody's really cracked that, I don't think, apart from news, I guess.
Bill, is there anything, if you're a digital publisher and you have a lot of Google risk from a traffic perspective, is there anything that you've seen or any advice that you'd give to publishers relating to how they can maybe safeguard their site against major organic traffic loss? Any best practices there?
It's such a broad question. Think about some things like geolocation, geofencing, the approaches that a Snapchat is taking to making people aware of something happening at events. If the event is something that's very relevant to your traffic, raising your awareness to the people who attend, it would be a good way to get them to take notice.
Yeah, I mean, there's other platforms like Pinterest. I'm seeing sites come into the Ezoic platform that are Pinterest-based traffic sites for the first time. Some of them really big, actually. That's a good one. Twitter is another one. Obviously, we get quite a bit of Twitter traffic to our site. Flipboard.
I love Flipboard.
Yeah, Flipboard's
It's the unknown one. If you're in news or content creation, it's fantastic. And it's just continuously rising over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, another thing to think about, and I'll add this in because we have the Publisher Lab podcast. Shelby Kang, who's wandering around here someplace, and myself, and we do Inside the Publisher Lab. And we talk about a lot of these topics a lot on the show. And one of the things seems to be a similar theme here recently is if you have an audience and you have a web property, you're largely attracting that audience to read your content right now. Your audience likely is not just a audience that only reads. They likely view videos, they likely listen to podcasts, they likely do a lot of other things, and there are many platforms that will allow you to monetize video content, audio content, lots of different forms of content, and you can start building out those different streams, trying to push your audience that's on your website into these other arenas, not to essentially move your audience, but essentially build them on other platforms so you do have a little bit more diversity. If you do it on YouTube, it's still more Google risk, but at least it's different Google.
Yeah, different Google. I don't see it as a massive problem, by the way. I think if it's a nice site, you can just think about make it bigger.
Questions? Right here, or right there, and we'll come up here.
Hi guys. It's a bit of a general question to Ezoic, I guess, and in a way everybody in the room. GDPR, we're still only sort of employing a basic cookie consent banner on the site. I was thinking we should probably go down the full cookie consent and cookie management solution. For anybody that's actually taken up that solution, has there anybody seen any sort of dramatic drops in revenue, traffic, or anything along those lines? Or
I love GDPR.
Sorry.
I mean, it's mixed, especially US publishers who got consent for their European users and used a proper GDPR model. You need to, so the rules are, and this is always the thing, because you can go down the route of becoming completely compliant, but you don't get thanked for it. If you completely ignore it, you're not getting any sanctions either, other than if you get consent for interest-based ads. So there's two things you've got to do. Is when a user comes to the page, you've got to ask them yes or no, are you going to opt into cookies or not? And if you need to keep records of this, and then you pass on those consents to Google. I've seen sites go down, and we support third-party consent modals. We produced our own third-party consent modal. It depends on whether you want to get on the wrong side of the European Union and whether 4% of your annual turnover is a lot of money or not. So, for example, businesses like Hearst take it extremely seriously because they have a lot of money on the line. and other small independent publishers are like, I'm not bothering. So I will try and help keep you GDPR compliant, but it really is what is your appetite for risk. And to be honest, if you're not the most like heinous breaker of the rules, it's unlikely you're going to get in trouble with the European Union.
Not legal advice.
Not legal advice.
I will also add that it seems like everyone in the space is essentially just trying to stay in the pack and run at about the same speed as everybody else and not be too fast or too slow.
Yeah. Blend in.
So we're all figuring it out together.
Cool. Just to wait and see what happens then, really.
Yeah, basically.
Cool.
We had a question up here.
Hiya. Thanks for the great talk today. It's been amazing. You mentioned PWAs. I just want to get your opinion on whether you think they're worth investing in to build any new websites, and that's a technology you think should go down.
Bill, do you want to go for that?
You can if you want.
Okay. Well, PWA, Progressive Web Apps, gives mobile functionality to web pages. So your mobile users can get notifications and you can use the the GPS location. There's a whole bunch of good features. You can offline
content reading. Yeah.
Content. And you can save it as an app on your phone. So there's it's kind of like, having an app for your website. I think it's really great. We got behind it. We put a lot of developer hours into creating a tool that turns normal web pages into PWA. And it's been really hard. Mike, is it ready yet?
I'm going to say it's nearly ready.
It's nearly ready.
We have a wait list.
Yeah, we also have a wait list. But yeah, it's pretty hard to do. If you're converting. So I would say definitely, I think it's a great idea. I love it. I think it's much better than AMP. It makes sense. So we're totally behind it. But it is quite tough.
So in my opinion, to answer your question, should you pay a developer to develop it? My personal answer would be no. I wouldn't pay a developer to develop it just yet.
It's early days.
Yes.
Pay Ezoic.
Well, you should.
Well, it's free.
It's free.
Okay,
but regardless of Ezoic or not, the truth is when you look at the development costs of anything, mobile apps is a good example. Now you can have a mobile app made for next to nothing, and not that you'll need one for any reason, but PWAs I've seen really high development costs so far, and really without the ability to, they provide offline content, the ability to do push notifications after the first page loads and the service worker installs the app in the background. The site is very fast, so there's a lot of really great things about it. But I would try to find ways to get one for free or kind of see how different publishers are using them. Because if you're going to fork out the kind of money for it, you want to really make sure, I would think, that you have a really good strategy for how you're going to essentially monetize and get the ROI from a project like that, which maybe you have.
And Chris, what's Google's opinion on that? They're pushing it up the search engine rankings?
Not talking about search rankings.
Because it's in Lighthouse.
I think he said yes.
So
it's being tested in Lighthouse, isn't it?
Yeah, so PWAs are in Lighthouse, but it's to do, again, so I'll steer away from ranking and all that kind of jazz. Think about PWAs as, again, a way another servicing your user base. You can test it, though. You don't have to go full to PWA. As long as you're HTTPS, you can start looking at, as I said, web notifications and see if that's something you're interested in. Then you can think about location personalization. So as long, again, your HTTPS, you can start asking them, are they happy to share their location, and then you can personalize based on that. If you want to go down the full route, then just make sure, in my opinion, make sure it's right for your business. AMP is important, so I would have AMP versions of your site. Again, that's to do with speed, though. That's to ensure making blatantly quick kind of content available for your users.
And you can do both, right? You can. You can do PWAMP.
We need
the real thing.
It needs better names. But no, literally fork it then, and then you would literally have a PWA version. You have, if you, MWeb is the wrong word, but let's say a responsive site, and then also an AMP version.
If you search PWAs versus AMP, I wrote a blog that basically was a summary of Google's talk that they gave last time on PWAs, AMP, and kind of that ecosystem. So there's a little bit of information in there about how AMP and PWAs can coexist together too that's interesting. So all worth reading up on if it's something that's interesting to you.
And there's sessions from Google I/O on YouTube from this year, sorry. Yeah, they're literally where the developers are talking about the benefits. Definitely one to check out.
Great, thank you.
We have time for about 2 more questions. Questions? Anybody?
I think
maybe
anybody.
one more, and then I'll ask one. Over here.
Hey, I've got a question for John. Have you bought websites on Flipper, and compared to your way that you shared, what are the cons and pros? Have you had success?
Yeah, so the obvious pro of approaching publishers directly is that you're not in competition, and quite often they're not worried about it. So it's slow or no response or all that stuff. So that's definitely, there's a pro and a con there, speed. So if you've got a pot of money and you want to invest it quickly, then it's a good place. And if you use Flipper correctly and you do your due diligence, then you can buy good sites. I think between the two of us, we bought 2 or 3 there, and they were okay because we knew what we were doing, but we did pay high multiples. We had a slightly unfair advantage because we could just plug it in to our system, and then what was a high multiple became a low multiple for us, so it was good. But quite often I would just drop out of the bidding because it just got too crazy.
All right.
So yeah, pros and cons there.
All right, thank you.
All right, so I have one last question for all 3 of you, and it's a question that I asked the panelists at Pubtelligence West in Santa Monica earlier this year. And I'm going to give one caveat, which is we can't say schema, because I think we've addressed it. We've beat that one to death. But if you're a publisher sitting in this room and you're thinking about your business as a digital publisher in 2019 and 2020, what is something that that you should be thinking about, or something you should be trying, or just general advice that you would provide to the audience? So they're probably thinking, what should I do next? How do I basically keep growing and developing my property? What advice would you give? And Bill, I'll start with you.
Good. Okay, so this is technically schema.
Yeah, I feel like I took away like your secret weapon if I.
So I'll mention entities. Talking about discrete, specific people, places, or things is important. I had a client, Baltimore.org. They were the convention center and visitors bureau for the city of Baltimore. They wanted to rank well for a term, Black history. And we tried. There were lots of Black history web pages that were ranking, or Baltimore-related Black history web pages that were ranking really, really well. So we said, okay, let's create a walking tour of the city of Baltimore, where people could see the 9-foot-tall statue of Billie Holiday, where people could see the mansions that Frederick Douglass came back when he was in his 60s and built in the city. Let's allow them to see all these Black historical events and people and places, the historic colleges, the hospitals, the other things that Baltimore was known for. We're going to introduce them to actual Black history instead of just repeating the words Black history over and over and over on the page. So think about how you can focus upon people, places, or things that are relevant and important to your stories that will attract people to your pages.
Excellent advice. John?
I'm going to go with, I've got sort of personal one and a company one. Can I have 2? Company one, personalization, obviously. I think, and the personal one, I've sort of noticed, and this is something, because I talk to a lot of publishers, so you know, several times a day sometimes, that people are quite often not looking at their sites as their users are looking at their sites. So they spend all day, every day, looking, you know, for example, at the homepage. It drives me mad. and not looking on mobile and not looking at landing pages and so on. And the other thing is sort of looking at old metrics like RPM and CPM and things like that instead of session earnings, or looking at user experience in an individual way. And I think when you start to change your thinking, you're insulating yourself from future trouble. Because one thing I've learned about SEO over the years is if you look after the user, then you're going to be okay with Google. And pretty much everything that's rolled out in terms of advice comes back to those things. So the more that you can optimize in a granular way, and then the compound effect, if you think about a website as being thousands of landing pages rather than my website, then you start thinking in a way that's going to help you, I would say, over the next couple of years.
Excellent. Chris?
I'm going to cheat and say 3 things.
Hey.
One, I'm going to pitch News Consumer Insights again. If you're in content, if you have news magazine, blogger type thing, go to the tool tonight, just check it out, see how you rank, read the playbook. You can jump into different sections. There's a table of contents, but there's a lot of nice tips in there too. Something that I think is going to be important, but not something you can do right now, is going to be ML. In terms of training models and things like that, but I don't think it will affect you directly right now. What it will affect is how companies like Ezoic and Google, how we build tools that will drive insights that will help you. I think that's the key thing. So your tools in the future will be data-trained models, or literally artificial intelligence almost. Obviously, I hate saying that. And then the final advice I will give you, is diversify your traffic. But we were talked about that. Segment your users. Think about, understand beyond your users, understand how they use your website. So think about segmenting it by a traffic source, or think about the value that individual sections like brand lovers are driving for your site. Like I said, more users equals more page views equals more revenue. So there's a reason to start looking in at how these different websites where the users are actually integrating and digesting your content, be it product or written content or anything like that.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me in thanking all of our guests and panelists here today for sharing some insights with all of us. So thank you guys very much.